I would honestly say, how many victims' names do people remember? Like, when these court cases are happening, do people remember the victims that come forward? I don't know who I'm sitting next to. This could be someone convicted of like 6 rapes, and I have no idea. They could be working with me. They could be someone I'm dating. And that kind of information is kept private.
But the question is, why is a convicted person out? Like, why are they not in prison?
Because of the Poppy Act within South Africa, you aren't allowed to actively accuse someone of something publicly with no conviction or no evidence of that happening.
Okay.
Yeah, no, sit with that.
So movements like Me Too.
Right.
Did that have a positive, negative impact? Welcome back to Palatable Politics, a show we make politics palatable. With me, your host, TJ Maslela. Welcome to the show. In today's session, we're going to be discussing women for change, the movement, what's been done, how it went, and what the next step is. Here to give us insight is a spokesperson, Miss Cameron Kasambala. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is a movement that means a lot to a lot of people. How did it come about?
So this movement followed our petition handover that we did on the 11th of April in front of the union buildings. And at that handover, we asked them to declare gender-based violence and femicide a national disaster. We received a response a few months later, and essentially they said that they had done everything that they needed to. They had all the frameworks in place, and that there was nothing further for them to do. However, when you have statistics like ours, we had a 33.8% increase in femicide. We have 117 rape cases reported every day. We're known as the rape capital of the world. Our femicide rate is 6 times the global average. And that's over the past 2 years. Then that's not very indicative of frameworks and legislation being, implemented efficiently. So Sabrina then had this idea that we should do a shutdown. We should bring South Africa to a standstill and force them to recognize the consequences of our social and economic absence. And we chose this time because the G20 event was when all these big, powerful leaders across the world were gathering. So there was a lot of international attention on South Africa. So they would receive pressure from external, but also from the citizens locally. And I think that is why we received such a quick response after several months of silence.
With that said, how did the movement go? How did the shutdown go?
It went really well. I think because our petition had reached over 1 million signatures, we knew that there were people showing up. But it's still so affirming to see how many people showed up. I was at Constitution Hill. There must have been anywhere between 300 to 400 people there. I know at Seapoint in Cape Town, it was also very busy. So it was so moving to see how many people took out of their day to come and show up. And I think because we did those 50 minutes of silence and everyone did stay silent, it was such a heavy grieving energy. We had someone reading the names of 500 victims, and it was quite heavy, but I think it was so important to memorialize and honor those victims who we've lost to femicide.
Why did you guys choose the colors that you have?
Purple.
Yeah.
For this particular movement. So we had an unburied casket that we displayed on that 11th of April. And on the casket, there were 5,578 purple beads. And that was to represent the number of women that had been killed due to femicide over 2023 and 2024. Each of those beads were purple. And so at that time, we asked people to turn their profile pictures to purple. Because we were continuing the same kind of initiative of asking them to declare GBV a national disaster, we carried on that movement to encourage them again to bring about purple profile pictures to kind of bring visibility to the movement. And obviously purple is our color as an organization as well.
Okay. And so now we've had the purple movement. WhatsApp profile pictures,
yes.
Instagram, everything was purple.
Yes.
And there were lots of scenes. You guys had a decentralized movement where in lots of different places there were people there wearing black. Now, how would you measure it? What's the next step? The government, the president obviously made a response.
Yes.
What was that, and where to from there?
So he classified gender-based violence and femicide as a national disaster. And what that means is that they will be utilizing existing frameworks and policies and implementing them more efficiently and with more urgency. So the next steps for us after the classification was we were told there would be a meeting on the 28th. So we are looking into what can we expect within that meeting. I think for us, this classification is such an important step because he said it at the G20 Social Summit. So it's not just something he signed privately in a paper with us. He said it publicly to both all, citizens within South Africa and the international world. So I think it's also kind of putting his head on the chopping block, he's holding himself accountable to multiple different kind of stakeholders. So for us, it's a great first step. But I think what remains is that we've seen a lot of high level promises. And so we wait for the action and the implementation efficiently, as well as transparency. So providing reports, audits, and things like that to show us exactly what's going on.
And the difference between national crisis, national disaster?
Interchangeable words in terms of it. I don't know why they do it, but national crisis is national disaster. Generally, the difference that we look at is classification versus declaration, which, again, I'm not too privy, civil society. We don't necessarily know all the details, but generally with classification, they are utilizing the existing frameworks and policies, where like with the declaration, you're creating new ones, you're putting new things in place. And with gender-based violence and femicide, we don't need new policies and legislation. We have the National Strategic Plan. We've got the Domestic Violence Act, Protection from Harassment Act. Like we have beautiful frameworks and legislation in place. They are being weekly implemented. So what we needed was more efficient implementation, which is what that classification means, that they will implement this more, urgently and better.
No, if I'm not mistaken, I think one of the differences is disaster, like in COVID, allows for funds to be disbursed or whatever to implement policy. But now, if these policies are implemented, what's the change you're expecting to see in terms of the reports and numbers?
So allegedly they allocated 21 billion rand to the NSP, which
NSP?
The National Strategic Plan.
Okay.
And we don't know where that money went. It might as well have disappeared into thin air. And because there's no audits or reports telling us what happened, we're not aware if there was even any funding that actually went into it. So things like that, where they say they've allocated money, but we have no evidence or clarification on where that money has gone. So part of this classification means actively being transparent about exactly where funding is going. And it does mean they will release funding, but to fund existing policies and legislation. So we're kind of waiting to see how that will be done. And that's why the audits are so important, because we want exact numbers on where all of this alleged money is going.
And the part where government comes in and law enforcement is largely after the crime violation thing has happened. How do we move away from that to ensure that it doesn't happen?
Right. More proactive than reactive.
Yeah.
I think the issue that we have is because of the magnitude of the issue and the lack of service delivery and kind of infrastructure to manage the existing crisis. It means that we're always on the back end. We're always, on the back foot, kind of like, okay, we need to respond to everything because it's a major crisis. But there's almost no time to be proactive because we're so behind. And so the hope is with implementing things like the NSP, improving like legislation that already exists, is that they should put us in a position where we now are able to manage the existing problem better, so that we can now be more proactive before problems can happen. So I think that's the big issue we're having, is we're kind of in panic mode 24/7.
Has there been any research or, I don't know, something to engage men and find out why we do it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'm a psychology student. There's so much about intergenerational trauma. We come from a very violent history, and, violence was associated with masculinity. And so a lot of those kind of characteristics then translate into, okay, to be a man, I must be violent. I must be aggressive, We can look at patriarchy and how it places women as almost second-class citizens or even as objects. And when something is an object, you have no issue harming it. So you think of a table. If a table bumps me, I'm going to be not bothered if I kick the table back. And that's almost how women are perceived, is these objects that can be owned, that we're entitled to, that we can possess, and therefore treat however we want. So I think there's multiple elements. And then I think on a social level, there is a big issue of unemployment. We see GBV rise significantly with the unemployment issues. There's a big substance use issue as well. So I think there's multiple factors that kind of influence why men tend to be such big perpetrators of gender-based violence and femicide.
And is it a thing that men, because we all come from mothers. We might not all have sisters, etc., but we all come from mothers, and we all, well, not all, but some want to have a mother for their children. Is there a change in mindset that's, look, I was raised by a woman, but now when I see a woman, obviously more peer, that there's a change, or we just never see women?
I mean, I think it really depends on the household you grew up in. In a lot of homes, there was a lot of abusive behavior and violence towards kind of maternal figures and even sisterly or, female figures within the home, which is then teaching you that, okay, even within my home, the women that were there were treated this way, which might then normalize and justify why you feel that's the best way to treat kind of your partner in this situation. I think also something to really speak about is rape culture. Rape culture isn't just something within the home. It's something with friends, with colleagues in the media and the songs we listen to. So it kind of also normalizes these behaviors because you hear these songs about drugging and raping women, but it's a cool song, so you don't even start to think that's actually a really dark message to be putting out. So I think there's so many also elements that feed into the psyche of why it also becomes more normalized.
So taking a step back, what is rape culture?
So rape culture speaks to any kind of media or content that normalizes sexual assault or rape behavior. So if you think of a lot of kind of like hip hop music, you might hear them say things like, I slipped something in her drink, then I took her home, like things like that where I'm not going to name the song. I don't want people to come for me. But if you listen to the lyrics of a lot of songs, even in pop, rock music, like if you listen, some of the things they're saying indicate stalker behavior, domestic violence, sexual assault. And because it's to a nice tune or they say it in a cool way, we don't even think about it, but the brain is very malleable. And so if it's constantly hearing media and content like that, seeing movies like that, shows like that, where this is okay, it's going to start to take that in and think that that's normal. So that's kind of what rape culture is.
So in what you're saying, right? That essentially it's been somewhat normalized because it's been cool or it's been set as a standard. Mm-hmm. How does one move from the standard and sometimes the negativity of it, for example, men are trash, to one that inspires or sets a tone of the desired behavior?
Right.
How does one move to that?
So I think movements like the Men Are Trash movement are interesting to discuss because I think they do serve a purpose in the sense that it did force people to kind of start to be like, why are they calling me trash? Like, what have I done? And it forces this almost self-reflection. I think the reaction though can be, well, if you're going to make me a monster, then I'm going to act like a monster, which I think is the concerning thing that happens with movements, is it can be almost like, I will retaliate because you're calling me that. And I think that's something we noticed with the Men Are Trash movement. We saw also kind of an increase in GBV. So it's,
really?
Yeah. Because there's a lot of, you can imagine if someone's telling you that you're a monster and you're this hard person, and maybe you're not someone who's deeply reflective, not self-aware enough to recognize it's not referring to you, there can be a lot of retaliation. I mean, when I was studying at my university, we were calling out behaviors within the school of, rape culture, sexual assault, like violence. And what happened was that the boys at the school got very angry and even more aggressive and threatening in response to being treated like they'd already done something wrong. So in movements like this, it's important that we are mindful of how to include everyone in the conversation, like you're saying. But self-awareness and reflection is something someone has to do on their own. Like, I can't teach you to be self-aware and reflect. I can tell you need to do it. I can tell you the things that you're doing that are, problematic, but that's an internal decision. And what I notice with men who join movements like this, they don't get impacted when you say things like men are trash or like, I hate men. Like, they don't feel any kind of attack because they know that you're not referring to them because they're not that group of people. And I think that's so important because also we look at the spectrum, I think, of violence. I think people think you're either a perpetrator or you're not. And that's the only thing that can happen. But if you look at it more of a spectrum, you have repeat offenders, once off, people who laugh and are okay with it, people who kind of ignore it, people who don't do, and you kind of like, there's this range of people that might not be the perpetrators, but there's a lot of them that are, perpetuating this violence. And then you have the small group that calls it out and that they say this isn't okay. And those are the people that don't feel impacted when you say things like men are trash. So I think it's a lot of like, how do we make it inclusive, but also put accountability on individuals to do the internal work.
And movements like Me Too, I just forgot how long ago it was, when, everyone was naming the perpetrator.
Right.
Did that have a positive, negative impact?
Oh, I think it had a positive impact in many ways. I think what happens when you name someone is other victims then can be like, oh, wait, I was also a victim, or that also happened to me. Or, well, if you can name this person, then I can name this person. And I think it gave a sense of like, solidarity and safety in the fact that you were not the only person that experienced it, whether it was because of a particular perpetrator or because of the acts itself. Like what we noticed is a lot of big actresses and big kind of media presences were speaking about their experiences behind the scenes, working in certain spaces, and that brought the conversation to, oh wow, there's a lot of sexual predation within kind of like the Hollywood scene and behind the scenes, and how you get jobs and things like that started to bring in those conversations. I think here, what we're always mindful of, especially in South Africa, is when you name perpetrators, there's the danger of, one, facing defamation and lawsuits because of the Poppy Act within South Africa. You aren't allowed to actively accuse someone of something publicly with no conviction or no evidence of that happening. And so what can happen then is, you want to out this like rapist because they've assaulted you and several other people. But because you've done that, this person can now sue you for defamation of character because you cannot say without fail, this person is now a convicted rapist, which is why that you mentioned earlier when we were talking about the National Sex Registry Offenders List. It's things like that where like you need concrete evidence and before you can name someone. And if you don't have that, then also what can happen is if someone does want to go forward and they do want to come out and say, this is what happened to me, and they want to go to court, that case is damaged because they can say, well, you guys did a whole defamation and slander of this person, so we can't go and have this case.
So essentially the Me Too movement was reduced because of legislative and policy issues. And the sex offenders list, what exactly is that for those that are not familiar?
Right. So the National Sex Offenders Registry List is basically a compilation of every single person within South Africa who has any kind of sexual offense on their name. So whether they were public indecency, whether they raped someone, inappropriate, like anything that was a sexual offense, once they've been convicted, they get put on this list and it's like known on their name. So that's where they're all compiled. The issue is that name list is not publicly available, except what they said is to schools, which I'm not even sure if that's exactly what's happening, but it's not publicly available to everyone else. And what that means is that anyone who was a perpetrator of any kind of sexual offense, they don't have to publicly admit that they've done it, and you are not made aware of it happening, which means I could be sitting across you and you could have this whole thing that's happened and I wouldn't know because it's not publicly available information, which means that when I'm walking around and hanging out, I don't know who I'm sitting next to. This could be someone convicted of like 6 rapes and I have no idea. They could be working with me. They could be someone I'm dating. And that kind of information is kept private. And the reason they've kind of like taken a while to publicize it is they see that there's privacy issues that are limiting their ability to publish this information.
Privacy issues of the convicted homies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Sit with that.
So wait, so you can't mention them before they're convicted because of Poppy and they're not convicted.
Right.
But you can't mention them after.
You could mention them after.
Okay. Oh, so
yeah, if they've been convicted, you can mention them. But it's not something that you, like if you wanted to hire someone, you wouldn't be able to verify that they weren't on that list. Like for me, when I was doing some volunteer work at schools, they needed us to do that process to get clearance from the, the NSRO. That's what I'm going to call it because the National Sex Offenders Registry. And when we did that, it took over a month to get it. We didn't even know where to go because the police and law enforcement didn't know how to do it. They didn't know what it was. We had to go to the national office. I mean, it was a lengthy process to get that information, that clearance. When, if it was publicly available, you just need to search Cameron Kasambala, look at the list. She's not on the list? Cool, we're fine. It's done. Like, it's so much easier if it's publicly available. But if it's not, it actually, like you said, it protects perpetrators from being seen as what they've done, And with regards, another concerning issue you've raised somewhere in there would be that you could be sitting next to someone that could be convicted of 6 rapes. But the question is, why is a convicted person out? Like, why are they not in prison? What's happening there in terms of sentencing and the harshness of people that are convicted of these crimes? So correct me on numbers because I read, but I always tend to be corrected on the exact numbers. I believe our conviction rate is 12%. So, right.
Of reported.
Yeah. No, once we go to court, yeah. 12% of the actual court cases end up with someone being sentenced to any kind of prison time or anything like that. which is not a good number. A lot of the time what we have happening is people get bail, and I've seen as low as 500 Rand for bail. People can get, like, they can be within the prison sentence, but then maybe they had good behavior, or their sentence has been reduced for whatever reason, or they're on probation. Maybe their sentence wasn't very long. Maybe they only got 2-3 years. And I think that's why people feel so emboldened, because the chances of you getting like a lengthy sentence is 12%, you know? And then if you do get a sentence, that lengthy sentence isn't always guaranteed. You might only get 2-3 years. And the chances of like forgetting a life sentence are very, very low. And I think this speaks to why, like, people ask us, why not the death penalty? We should put the death penalty on the table. And we're like, I mean, you can do it, but 88% of those people are going to walk away and they're not going to be impacted. So it doesn't really bother them because there's such a low chance that anything will happen to them. So I think within the court systems, there's a lot of systemic failures and mishandling of cases, especially because there aren't normally experts on GBV and femicide, which is important in these cases because there's a lot of nuances and details that you need to be mindful of when dealing with GBV. It's not as cut and dry as people would think. And even when it is, unfortunately, you still might have that person working for you.
So the reason why it's 12% is largely explained because of capacity to have experts on GBV provide evidence in their trial, etc.
And also, obviously, perpetrators and normalization of certain things within the court system. Like if you go to the courts and you're like, cool, this is what happened. And, you know, I said, okay, I was sexually assaulted while I was out. I'm with a friend last night. Okay, but then the narratives of being out late at a club as a woman, what were you wearing? Like those, exactly, those hidden kind of biases that we have that people kind of don't admit to publicly also seep into the court systems, because the kind of questions that they've asked, and I'll tell you some of the things we've heard be asked to like a victim coming forward with like rape. They've been asked, how big was it? What color was it? How long did it last? What position were you in? Like things like that. Obviously, this is humiliating and so degrading, but it's that, like, if you were getting asked this kind of questions, it sounds like you're on trial. Like you need to convince people what happened. And it's so like violating and humiliating. So it's not a pleasant experience to try and get justice for yourself. It's quite horrible.
Is this something that's experienced primarily by police officers or court officials that would have been male, or is it across male and female?
I think it's scary to admit that women can be perpetuators as well, and that they can enable systems. We think of like in abusive relationships, sometimes it's your mom that says, okay, but just be a better wife and like behave and like don't make him angry, you know? And I think that's also scary, is that sometimes women can enable these very damaging and dangerous behaviors, which also is kind of sad because they often are victims as well. And you have to wonder how deeply ingrained is the system in your mind that you are justifying harm you have experienced yourself.
Yeah, that's so. Does it build towards the narrative of women, like saying, basically covering up and enabling it, whether it be their husbands, fathers, partners, uncles, whatever, that are doing that? How does one have them, like, is it a courage? Is it's a courage thing? Is it a don't care? Is it a it's been normalized? Is it shame? What's the reason for them protecting and not supporting the victim?
I think normalization is such a big thing. I know I've been saying it so much, but things got ingrained also in cultures and in social norms. And once things are in cultures, people get very protective of their culture. You know, no one wants you to say, okay, well, your culture is wrong and you guys are being violent and abusive. Like, people do not like that, and they're very protective of that culture. So if you have a culture that's normalized violence against women and you try and say, okay, this is not right, there's going to be a lot of pushback from the community. And then you mentioned the shame element, that yes, there probably is an element of shame, and that families don't want to expose their family members for having done this thing because it's shameful to the family. Like, what do you mean my son was a rapist? He doesn't, no, he wouldn't have done that. There's no way he did that. And you're wrong, you know? And I think that's quite sad, but it's in a lot of institutions. I mean, we see it in religious institutions as well, where there's this protection of abusers because they don't want the institution to look bad. They don't want them to seem like, okay, we have these abusers. No, we don't. Everything's fine here, you know? So I think there's a lot of, like you said, shame and protection to not look bad.
So If in the case that a woman is violated, assaulted, raped, etc., what's the process they should follow that is going to maximize the possibility of a conviction?
Right. So I think there's two ways that you can go about it. I think the first is that there is no pressure on a victim or survivor to do anything. And I think that's so important because people want to rush them to do everything. And this person has experienced one of the most traumatic things that they probably ever will in their life. And trying to shove them into dealing with something is traumatic. And that's why we speak about like secondary victimization. You put them through the trauma again because you're trying to push them into it when they're not ready. So I think giving them time to be ready is so important. However, on the other side, it is a bit of a time game because especially with like sexual assault, because it's so hard to get a conviction, you need as much evidence as possible. And a big evidence is your DNA evidence. And DNA evidence gets washed away if you take a shower, which means that essentially after something has happened, you already need to be going to some kind of medical space to get a rape kit done. But to do that, you need to get a document from the police that confirm that you have been raped so that the hospital knows that they are allowed to do a rape kit. And this is when you start to see like how lengthy the process is. So you have this happen. You don't exactly know what you're supposed to do, but if you go to the hospital, they're going to turn you away. They're going to say, no, you need to go to the police. You need to lodge a case. They'll make you sign a form. You bring the form back, then we can do this rape kit on you. So now you need to go to the police and you need to hope that they actually care enough to help you because unfortunately, a lot of the time our survivors are turned away. They get told it's a family matter. They must deal with it on their own. It's happened. So now why are you making a big thing? So it's not always easy to even get, a response. And that's why only 5% of rapes are reported as well. So you get this. They finally help you do the forms. You go to the hospital. You get your rape kit done. You get all the DNA you need to do. Send it to the lab for forensics. However, we have 140,000 DNA backlog, so who knows when you're going to get that data back. Then you have to wait for you to get that information. And if it's taking too long, you still need to go to the court, go through the court process, have all of the documentation then brought there. And there's such an importance for legal guidance and throughout this whole process because it is confusing and it's very tricky. And that's why we don't blame anyone who doesn't go through with this. But if they want to, legal guidance is so important because they need to know what their rights are. They need to understand the process to make sure that they can have the best possible case. And they need to also know that it'll take time and that it's not easy. It's quite a draining process, but should it go well and should there be a conviction, that's amazing. But that's why, again, we say we don't put a lot of pressure on survivors to have to do anything because it's not a fun process. It's not easy. It's very traumatic and they don't make it, there's no empathy in this process for you. Like they do not care that you are a victim. It's tick box, tick box, tick box. If you haven't ticked the boxes, well, sucks to suck.
And then the aspect, fine, going to a police station, that's pretty simple. Now going to a hospital. If you don't have a medical aid, should you now look for the nearest public hospital, or you can just go to any hospital and there's some type of agreement that you can just go there and get the kit done?
No, you need to go to some kind of public hospital. I don't know the exact details of private institutions, but they generally do want you to pay for any kind of service that you need. So you would need to go to a public hospital, which again can be its own traumatic experience because of how overcrowded they are, how busy they are. And what we've also noticed is they run out of rape kits. So you can get there and they can say, we don't have any rape kits anymore. We've run out. And so then there really is nothing for you to do. And I think that's why this process, we're so empathetic to survivors to say, you don't need to feel like you have to rush and do this process. It is hard, it is exhausting, it's traumatic. And I think that's where empathy needs to come in because I think what also happens is when someone doesn't want to come through immediately, people can also shame them should they want to come forward a few months later, a few years later. They're like, well, why didn't you do it as soon as it happened? When the reality is it's not on anyone else's timeline when someone is ready to approach and deal with something. And I think that's so important with these situations, especially if you have someone that you know that's going through it. It's not your job to force them to do anything. You can educate them, you can inform them, you can tell them what happens. But this person has gone through something that a lot of people could never understand. And so it really is working on their timelines as well.
And the component of legal guidance are there NGOs or law firms that are willing to provide free assistance? If so, where can a victim go?
So there are legal firms that provide pro bono services. often when people reach out to us as an organization, one of the things we do is we offer victim support. Part of the victim support we offer is because we want them to be able to get legal support, free counseling. If we can figure out the process, because Sabrina is quite familiar with the process and the forms that need to be signed, we can just give them a bit of an idea of what they need to do should they not be able to get legal support immediately. So we do try and make sure we offer them facilities that will, support them. So a lot of nonprofit organizations can do that. They can connect them with potential kind of organizations or individuals that will offer free services. So I always recommend reaching out to an organization like Women for Change or other ones, because we do try to make connections with people and we do try to make sure we find support for you. I think we also have now been really intentional about specific locations as well. So having them reach out saying, I live in this area. And then we go and we see, okay, what's the nearest hospital? Who's the nearest lawyer? Calling the lawyer. Do you guys offer free services? Can this person reach out? So it's a lot of trying to support someone who's in a very, fragile state and try and make it as easy for them as possible. Even if they just want to come talk to us just about it. Like, that's something we do. We just talk to them. And that is very helpful. I don't think people realize how much someone just needs a listening ear.
I guess I should have started here, but what are the services that Women for Change offers?
So obviously we push for a lot of advocacy and policy changing. We do a lot of awareness and kind of amplifying of stories. So you'll see we post a lot of memorial posts. And the reason we do that is because not every story becomes hot news and goes viral. And so our want is to still get stories out there and bring attention to these stories, especially for families who still want some kind of justice, bringing their loved one, the family, and sharing that information so that people can be aware of it and they can get further support if they need it. Like I mentioned with the victim support, they come to us, they can talk to us, we listen to them, we connect them with any kind of services they might need help with. We also then are big on education, so teaching people about GBV, what it looks like, and then you can see obviously pushing for policy change, like doing the shutdown and our petition handover. That's the work we do.
No, I know you indicated that about only 5% of rapes get reported, and of that 5%, likely to see about 12% conviction rate. And even saying those numbers are childish. Now, there's also the component that men always come back with, and I guess even if it's not just men, it's a general phenomenon of people saying, no, she only did it because this person was about to become a president, or this person wanted money, or, those things. How real are incidents like that, and how much do they account for the actual interactions?
I would honestly say, how many victims' names do people remember? Like, when these court cases are happening, do people remember the victims that come forward? Because if it's all for fame and money, we would remember them, but that's not what happens. They come forward, they say this is what's happening, but then this powerful person who has more resources and connections can just shut them up and put it to silence, or have these very quiet court cases that no one hears about. So we don't even know who these victims are a lot of the time. And if we don't know who you are, chances are you're not getting famous and successful off of this. And if you somehow do become publicly known, which is not fun, you will see the influx of slander and hate and death threats that come at these people who try and come forward. And I would ask, who wants to be like that? Who wants to be in a situation where people are threatening to kill you, people are wishing death on you, people are releasing your address, your workplace, like trying to destroy your life? Like, no one wants to go through that experience. It's horrible. So it also leads to the question of, think of it that way. Like, no one wants to experience that. And also, how many victims do we actually remember that come forward? It's things like that when we ask the question of, so really, what are you so angry about? And the thing we'll always hear is, but it could be a false allegation and it could be a false case. And to that, I would say, it's estimated that you're about 200 times more likely to be sexually assaulted or raped by another man than you are to have a false allegation. So bring in the question then, are we really that scared of false allegations? Or do we know that we're perpetrators, and we know perpetrators, and we don't want that coming out?
I agree with you, right? And I do have, obviously as a man, I've encountered other men that have, whether it's rape accused, violence, etc. And one does their part, even if it's a disassociation, because there isn't much one can do beyond don't do that. And especially, I can encourage you to do it, but I mean, I can encourage you to report it, but like you're saying, there's no... Oh, there actually is an obligation now. If I'm not mistaken, under Lamola, there was a law that was passed that made it compulsory for you to report GBV or rape if you know about it. Are you familiar with that law?
I'm not, but I do know about it being an accessory to crimes when it comes to like laws and things.
So if you know about it but don't report, then you can become accessory, and
then that can become a whole issue. Because you think about it like a murder. If someone murdered somebody and you knew, and you even maybe helped in any kind of way, but you knew and you didn't say anything, you're an accessory to murder. Because you were aware of it and you didn't do anything to handle it. So it would make sense as well for gender-based violence and femicide. If you knew about it and you didn't say anything, you are an accessory in many ways to that crime. But because, again, it's so normalized and it's already hard enough for the perpetrator to get any consequences, the chances of someone getting consequences for being an accessory, they might as well be non-existent.
Okay, true. But okay, so on the line of thought I was going before I made that realization, there is and I'll say perceived because I've never experienced it, but there is this thing of when you go out that, okay, no, especially slay queens, that no, stay away. If you go and you, I don't know, get lucky, you go home with her, whatever, that there might be, whether it be an invoice, mavuso, or an extortion thing in the morning. How real are those, or how do we... how does one deal with that?
I think money is always a great justification for why a man can retaliate against a woman. If we think of the two cousins who were murdered in Mamelodi, the huge thing was, well, this man spent 10,000 rand on them. And then what did they expect to happen, right? Which, by the way, was wrong because it was an ex-boyfriend. But people ran with that narrative. And then we started to see the victim blaming really coming up because everyone said, well, why did they let that man spend 10,000 rand? And to that question, I ask, why would you spend 10,000 rand on people you don't know? And let's have those conversations on why would people spend these exorbitant amounts of money on people that they're not familiar with? For what? Like, what do you gain in doing that? And so we mentioned these slay queens, but someone is willingly paying money for whatever reason to spend on these slay queens. They're spending money on them. And again, I don't, maybe I'm just poor, but I can't imagine spending that kind of money on people.
That's wild.
Exactly.
That's wild.
And when it comes to extortion and trying to blackmail people to try and get that money as well, again, if you have that kind of money, you probably have power and resources to put things like that to rest. You can probably find connections that shut down that very quickly.
Okay. Let's use a hypothetical example of, let's say me. I find myself in a situation where a lady says, if you don't give me money, I'm going to report a case, a rape case, whatever. What's your advice to me in a situation like that? Like saying, I've never been in one, so I don't know if they have happened, but obviously one is heard. But let's say I do find myself in that position. What should I do?
And you didn't do anything.
Yeah, no, I didn't do anything.
But you didn't do anything. Like I said, to even get the case to be taken at the police level is very hard. So it's not like as soon as this happens, like, boom, you're in jail. Like, it is, that's why I said false allegations are not something that's common. It's not easy to even get to the point where we arrive at the courts. So someone just saying this and then going to the police and there's no evidence for it, already, chances are they're not going to be taken seriously.
With that said, at what point, let's say a lady's raped and she goes to report it at the police, do the police act then, or you need to follow this whole process of going to hospital first and prove your case before the guy gets arrested?
No, the hospital thing is more for you.
Okay.
But again, like, the police aren't necessarily the most reactive. So that's why I said the chances of something coming of it, even like of you being arrested, it's not very likely. Like, it's not... That's why I keep saying it's not as easy as people think to lodge a false allegation and for anything to really come of it. Unless you've done something that might be...
Okay, no, now I'm just talking generally. I'm past that false allegation thing. Now I'm just talking generally. The process for say my sister's been assaulted, we go and report it. How long before something's thinking against that guy? And should she avoid the guy? Should she confront the guy?
I can tell you how long. It depends on the police force. It depends on what's happening. I mean, with Olorato's case, it took hours for them to even connect with each other. And these were police stations that were 10 minutes apart. It's not as, there's no exact number for, okay, if you report within 24 hours, it depends on that police station. It depends on the resources they have. For example, they might say they don't have a car, so they can't make the arrest because the car is being used for something else somewhere else. So they can't arrest anyone, So it's not as easy as saying like, okay, this is when this thing should happen. It could take an hour, it could take a few hours, it could take a few days. And that's what makes it so hard, I think, for survivors, because this person can be walking around free for several months.
In your campus.
In
your workplace.
And a lot of students at university campuses experience that, where they're rapists, they're abusers. They go about their merry way because the university says, okay, we'll put them on probation, or we'll see what we can do, and then nothing comes of it. So it's pretty, unfortunately, common to just be living amongst your perpetrator. And that's why it's also very scary to be someone who has reported something, because you also have to think of that backlash. Like, if you do go forward and nothing happens, this person knows you went forward, and now what happens to you?
All of this is bleak, saddening. Yeah, like it's but where in all of this do you see hope for whether it be improvements, change, issues being addressed, or what's the light at the end of the tunnel, if any?
There is one, and I think the reality is that when we think of movements, things don't fix overnight, and I think that's so important. And I'll bring it to like the apartheid system, right? It didn't stop after 10, 20, 30, 40 years. They were still pushing. It took decades of consistent effort, even when nothing was coming of it, even when they doubled down in like the 1940s, we're going to make it even worse. It took consistent effort. And that's what happens, unfortunately, with human rights movements. It's not something that's fixed overnight. And so the hope is that there will be a time when it's sorted out. There will be a time when it's improved. And something like this classification is a step forward. And I think that's so important to think of, like, when we had the total shutdown in 2018, the Am I Next movement in 2019, those movements led to the development of the National Strategic Plan. So these movements have purpose. So now our movement led to the classification as a national disaster, So we keep passing the baton and moving forward. And it might not seem immediate, and we might not see impacts like super quick, but it's coming and it's happening. And that's what it takes: diligent, committed effort. As soon as we stop and we relax, we take the pressure off the government to do things, and then they can relax. So it will be something that's dealt with. It can be changed, but it needs consistent effort. And the great thing about when things start to kind of move faster and we see better implementation, we will see better responses coming out. But there's a reason organizations like ours and others exist, is to be that gap that people need that the government is not filling.
And I do wish you well, so that you have a job, but also hope the need for your organization.
I know, this is twofold. I think that the thing is that it's multi-layered. It starts with government, but again, you have to hit the grassroots, social, cultural, big factors, unemployment, substance use. There's so many layers to this issue. You tackle them kind of each at a time, and then we get to a point where it's
so if you were to give a message, one, to victims, but also to perpetrators, what would that be? Oh, obviously separately.
I mean, up to both, the time is coming. Whether for perpetrators, the time is coming for you to face consequences, or for victims and survivors, the time is coming where you will get justice. The time will come. The sad thing, I think, is that, we say, you might not see it in your own lifetime. And that is a sad thing that happens with movements, is you might not. But I think let us not lose the momentum and drive to keep pushing for change. I think as much as I want change for myself, Lord, if I have children, I want more change for them than I even want for myself. So keeping that momentum and keep pushing for that change. And for perpetrators, like I said, the time will come. And unfortunately, there will be a time when there's nowhere to hide.
Thank you. What's the next step or the next movement?
we wait. No, but really it is. I think that the thing is that, like I said, these things don't get fixed overnight, so we wait. You know, we have this meeting, like I said, potential on the 28th. We see what the government wants to do. What are they saying they're going to do? And we give them the time to do the action plan. And I think what we noticed is it took 5 years for really us to really be like, okay, you haven't implemented this NSP, like what's going on? I think for this movement, because they've put so much pressure on themselves, we should see some kind of reaction quicker. But I think there's no deadline for us on when we expect something. But when we notice that something isn't happening, like if it's coming 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, and we're not seeing any implementation, it's going to come back and we're going to do something else to shake them again.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for making time and also towards fighting to make it a better country and world at large.
Thank you for having us and having this important conversation.
Guys, I hope it's been insightful. I hope that you learn. I hope if you're a perpetrator, you be better and you find remorse. It's not remorse. What is it? What's the term?
Repentance.
Repent. Yeah. You repent. If you know someone that has been a victim, you support them and let's call each other out and create a better standard for men. But in the meantime, before and after that, like, subscribe, share, and join the Women for Change movement. Like, subscribe. Thank you. Palatable Politics.